Off. There we go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 290. As always, I am your host, Donald Kendal. Jim already screwed up the intro here because I wanted to slowly reveal that we had all of the standard people, all the classic Avengers back in the group here. Oh, now we're going.
There you go.
So like I said, Donald Kendal here, joined by, I've got Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute. Justin, it's been like weeks since you've been on. How are you?
I'm doing okay. The reason I stopped coming on primarily is because you guys stopped paying me money to come on. So what I did was I went out and I found a sponsor.
Oh,
so
God.
this appearance by Justin Haskins is brought to you by Cheerios.
Oh, nice.
Which I agreed to eat during the show as part of my deal. So
as loudly as possible, too.
Loudly as I possibly can. So buy Cheerios, everyone.
You realize you just opened up Cheerios to a huge boycott campaign.
Right.
Yeah,
just to
true.
be clear, this
is off the rails.
Just to be clear. All right. When you guys invite me on the show, off the rails is what you get. Number one. Number two, please don't sue me or boycott Cheerios or something because they're supporting the evil Heartland Institute or Justin Haskins, because it's not a real sponsorship. It's at least not officially on paper. So
yeah. Well, they sold it to you. Like, they provided your own sustenance. So, like, that's on them.
Yeah, and you're hearing Isaac Orr, research fellow. Is that your title? Policy fellow. Policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. Isaac Orr has got a new puppy. How are you?
Very tired.
Oh, jeez. Don't give that to me. Don't say that to me.
We got a little collie.
Oh.
Nice.
I may have to leave the show to let her outside. She likes to go inside, and that's not what I want. So,
Is it named Lassie?
Maple.
Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir? Do you have a cereal sponsor today?
I don't have a cereal sponsor. In fact, if I'm a little grumpy today, it's more grumpier than usual, I should say. I'm doing a little bit of a different eating regimen. I've taken gluten and pretty much all carbs out of my diet for as long as I can stand it. So it's giving me headaches. It's making me grumpy. It's making me hungry.
All right.
But
Right,
I'll also be pretty grumpy about the topics we got today. So stay tuned.
So Justin's got a new sponsor.
Yeah, he's eating carbs, right? He's eating carbs right in front of me. What an jerk.
Yeah.
Isaac's got a new dog, and Jim's got a new eating disorder. Great.
I grabbed some donuts this morning for us. Would it help you, Jim, if I ate some of those donuts during the show?
It would certainly help our listeners if you ate it as loudly as possible.
Yeah, like
So? I mean, they're very soft, delicious donuts. They're not dried out and stale and hard, so they won't make much crunch.
All right, just be sure to get some jelly on your shirt.
Yes. So Justin, you already kind of referenced this, but it might come as a surprise to Isaac that a lot of people a lot of listeners are asking about you. They're saying, where is this guy, man? I tune in to hear Justin's, good takes on these subjects, and he hasn't been on. We've literally had emails asking about you. This one gentleman says, also, you guys always tease that Justin was fired from the podcast. It's true. Why isn't he on anymore? He was like 70% of the reason why I listen. Surely I'm the other 30%. But yeah, Justin, what's going on here? You even said that you had heard some people asking about you too.
I did. I've had people ask why I'm not on the show. Some people have actually even suggested to my father, this is true, asked him if I really had been fired from my job because of you morons talking about me being fired. So I just want everyone to know, I want everyone in the Justin Haskins fan club,
all 5 of you.
Well, you say that, Isaac, but I've got almost 100,000
dedicated.
Oh no! I've got tens of thousands of devoted fans, and they want to know why I've been on the show. And the reason why is because I've had better things to do. So, it's not a very good. It's not. I don't know what to tell you. They stopped paying me, and I've got better things to do. So I went out and I got a Cheerios sponsor, and now I'm back on for this one time. So soak it in, everybody.
Well, I mean, I think it's undeniable that you are a crucial part of this podcast. There was another email that we got that referred to you as an important part of the entertainment dynamic and information explanation and analysis. And then there was a separate there was a separate review on iTunes, which if anyone's listening to this, give us a good review on iTunes. It really helps promote this podcast. But they said that whatever is going on between Orr and Haskins, although friendly, is just great content. So your guys' rivalry is really pushing us to the stars here.
Well, can you even really call it a rivalry when one side is just bludgeoning the other?
Which side is that?
I don't know. Well, I think we all know which side that is. I don't think we need to embarrass Isaac anymore.
Well, it's not a rivalry when one side doesn't show up half the time. So
yeah, Isaac knows all about that. He's a Packers fan, so he's well aware of
the choke factor. Yeah.
Well, you know what? I mean, really, the Bears are the ones that we should be making fun of here, right? So not the Packers, but look. Isaac and I love each other very deeply. And, he's the other 10% of the reason why I'm on the show. And now he's walking off the show.
You just offended
it's
him.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
This is another reason why Justin doesn't come on. Just the professionalism of this podcast. Oh, there's a dog.
Oh, wait, okay.
Oh, there's a puppy.
Okay,
He's
good
brought
reason.
The puppy on.
Good reason. All right.
Mabel, the lassie puppy.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
that
Maple.
That
The
dog
collie
is
puppy.
cute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta take her outside though. So you guys carry on.
Oh, we'll
Okay,
set up
it'll
this
be like
conversation.
don't worry, it'll be just like you're here. So
Exactly. I'll have nothing to contribute.
Won't be missed.
yeah.
But don't hurry back. Hurry back.
Yeah, so as the title of the podcast suggests, we want to talk about climate change, and if we have time, a little bit of the Supreme Court packing that seems to be getting a little bit of news headlines here. So there's a couple of things that kind of spurred this this topic that we're going to talk about, climate change. You know, we obviously, Heartland Institute, we talk about climate change, climate alarmism, energy policy, environment stuff all of the time. But, on this podcast, we touch on it, here and there, but not too much, and specifically not too much lately, because it seems like there's been a lull in climate change alarmism. It could just be me. And I know we're biased because, like I said, it's like our job to kind of pay attention to the climate change subject. So we're probably disproportionately exposed to news about climate change. But I still feel like there's a lull. The Trump administration probably plays a role in that. They seem to not pay a whole lot of attention to the subject. They even reverse course on a couple of things, whether it's some of these mandates or the Paris Climate Accord. The Greta turned 18, I think, has something to do with this. So she's not like the cute little climate kid anymore. No one wants to talk about her. She had that documentary that came out on Hulu. It didn't even cause a ripple in the national conversation. People like Michael Schellenberger and Michael Moore kind of blew holes in the bottom of the climate alarmism narrative boat over the last 6 months or so. And the news coverage has been soaked up with 24/7 COVID talk. So because of all of this stuff, I feel like climate change is not really getting the time of day anymore. Is it just me, or have you guys noticed this too? Jim?
Yeah, I think I've noticed that, although this is not going to be a permanent state of affairs. I know we're going to get lots of climate push from the media, which we'll show you in a minute on a couple clips here in the podcast. But it's also clear that the Biden administration is going to be pushing hard on, we've talked about this. It just hasn't gotten a lot of mainstream media press attention because it's not something that the public would support. And that's basically implementing the Green New Deal on steroids. His spending package, the latest spending package. I don't know how many of these are we going to have? I don't know. But every 4 months we spend another $1 trillion or $3 trillion. No big deal. But it's not a recovery package. It's a Green New Deal package. It's spending. Yes, right. The infrastructure deal. Most of that infrastructure spending is subsidies for electric cars. It's closing coal and natural gas fired plants, which is the only reliable energy besides nuclear that keeps the lights on in this country. Just ask people in Texas or in California. So the Heartland Institute is certainly going to do our part to keep the focus on what the Biden administration is trying to do. In fact, a week from the day we're recording this podcast, today is April 15th. A week from today is April 22nd. April 22nd is not just Lenin's birthday. It is also, not coincidentally,
John Lennon?
no, that would be Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Who I'm saying, Justin, come on, guys, stopping socialism. You knew better than that. I know it's just a joke. But it's also Earth Day, and that's not actually a coincidence, because the agenda of Earth Day and the agenda of Bolsheviks and communists are pretty much in line with each other all the time, and especially now. And actually, the Heartland Institute, I didn't plan to announce this here, but if you email the show or email me at jlakely@heartland.org, we are actually doing a special briefing about Biden's climate agenda next Tuesday. So that'd be on the 20th. So you can sit in on that if you like. It's free. And you can just send that email to me, jlakely@heartland.org. But the focus on climate is going to be coming back, and I think pretty hard.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And like Jim kind of teased, there's a video that really highlights that fact. But Justin, I mean, have you kind of noticed this as well? I mean, you and I obviously do a lot of the coverage of, the Great Reset, and what kind of undergirds that agenda is this potential threat, this existential threat hanging out there of climate change. But like, it just doesn't seem like it's been talked a whole lot about. Like, when was that like CNN town hall about climate action with all of the different candidates? That was like a year and a half ago. Yeah.
It was during the Democratic primary. It was basically a climate.
But it was like early.
7 hours.
It was before Super Tuesday, which is in April, so it had to have been more than a year ago. Yeah. I mean, a couple things. First of all, I think the fact that we go through these cycles of crises with the left, it's like a never-ending cycle of crises. You can almost like set your calendar by it. We've got climate change, we've got police shootings, we've got healthcare, there's like five or six
stuff.
Yeah, we've got like 6 crises, and they just keep recycling. But the climate change thing, the thing that makes it, I think the fact that it's not the permanent crisis proves that it's not the crisis that they claim that it is.
Right.
Because if we're all going to die because of climate change, if this is truly an existential crisis, meaning it's a threat to the existence of humanity, which every single major Democratic Party candidate running for president in the last go-around said.
And Biden says too.
Right. Yes, including the one who's president right now. They all said that. Existential crisis. Then why aren't we always talking about it? Who cares about police shootings and about infrastructure packages and about whatever? The infrastructure bill has a bunch of stuff in there about helping old people. Like, elder care. Like, why do we care about elder care if we're all about to die? Like, if we're all going to die from global warming, is that really a priority? No, nothing is a priority except for this. That proves that they don't even really believe it themselves. Because they control Congress right now, both houses. They control the White House. And what did they start off with? They started off with COVID. They started off with infrastructure. They've got all kinds of regulations and new agencies and, all sorts of stuff. But there's not, the number one priority should be saving the planet from being totally wiped out by a climate change crisis, and it's not. It's not even the second or third thing on the list. That is proof of the fact that they don't really believe that it's an existential crisis. They might think it's a problem, but they don't believe that we're all going to die from it. Like they all seem to suggest that they actually believe it. There's no way they believe it, or else that's all they'd be talking about.
Right. And as Jim teased kind of at the beginning of this conversation, it seems like the people in power, at least in the media, are kind of revealing their hand of how this climate change story is going to be used in the future here. So thank you to James O'Keefe and Project Veritas, who just coincidentally will be featured at Heartland's, 37th anniversary benefit dinner here in a couple of months. So you can buy your tickets to that now. I'll have a link in the show notes if you're interested in. But they just released some footage of a director, CNN director, technical director, talking about how CNN operated when Trump was in office and what their plans are for the future. So let's play some of this clip here.
I think we got him through this term. We would always show shots of him jogging, him in aviator shades, and like you paint him as a young geriatric.
We were creating story there.
A young
Didn't
geriatric.
know anything about. So that's I think that's propaganda.
I think what we did, we got Trump out. I am 100% going to say it, and I 100% believe it, that if it wasn't for CNN, I don't know that Trump would have got voted out. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
Do you think it's going to be just like a lot of like fear, like climate?
Yeah, fear sells. Fear sells.
No one ever says those things out loud, but it's obvious.
For years, we've heard that CNN is the most trusted name in news, but a CNN director is on tape telling us that they're propaganda, helping a certain political candidate, employees admitting what we've always known to be true.
Trump was, I don't know, like his hand was shaking or whatever like that. We brought in like so many medical people to like all tell a story that like it was all speculation. That he was like neurological damage, like that he was losing it. He's unfit to, whatever. We were creating story there that we didn't know anything about.
I think there's just like a COVID fatigue. So like whenever a new story comes up, they're going to latch onto it. They've already announced in our office that once the public will be open to it, we're going to start focusing mainly on climate. It's going to be our focus. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
Who decides that?
The head of the network,
Who's that? Is that Zucker?
Zucker, yeah. Climate change is going to be the next COVID thing for CNN. We're gonna hone it.
Focus.
Our focus was to get Trump out of office.
Yeah, you
right?
mentioned that
without
already.
saying it. That's what it was.
And that's the question, Mr. Zucker.
Right,
Why
so-
is it so important to hide the truth of what you...
So I thought this was a pretty, just, I don't know, crazy admission. Project Veritas, James O'Keefe, they get a lot of good stuff. This was top notch. And obviously the main takeaway from this video is kind of the self-awareness that CNN is just like propaganda with the sole mission to get rid of Trump, not to relay any news or information or anything like that, but to literally manufacture stories that hurt Trump. And I know like the audio of that is kind of garbled, especially if you're just listening to the audio version. When you actually watch the clip, they have it spelled out there. But we could have an entire conversation about just the terrible state of the media, but that would require hours, and that's just for Jim's rant. But the other headline from this video is the reveal that CNN is going to go hard into climate change alarmism in the next couple of months. So after kind of hoisting the flag of mission accomplished on getting Trump out of office, the CNN technical director there says, so our next big thing is going to be for climate change awareness. When he was asked whether or not they're going to use fear to get this message across, he says, oh, yeah, fear sells. Later, he says, they've already announced in our office that once the public will be open to it, we're going to start focusing mainly on climate. It's going to be our focus. Climate change is going to be the next COVID thing for CNN. We're going to hone in on it. So I don't even know where to start on all of this. I mean, I guess just initial reactions. I was going to go to Isaac, but I think you got in the middle of that. So I'll go to Justin first. Initial reactions.
So first of all, I just want to echo the sentiment that like 98% of the audience has right now. And that is, yeah, like we already knew that CNN is exactly doing this. And they've been doing this for years and years and years. And so I'm not saying this isn't important. It is important because we caught them. We have them on tape. Project Veritas has them on tape admitting it. But if you're a person on the right, you've known this for a long, long time. I mean, this is nothing shocking here. CNN is deliberately lying to push a political agenda. There's no doubt about it. Like, yes, absolutely. And throughout the Trump era, they were worse than ever. There's, again, no doubt about it whatsoever. I remember distinctly sitting in a hotel lobby with my father, and up popped CNN, and it was a story about how at some event Donald Trump got 2 scoops of ice cream and everyone else got 1. That's a serious story.
Oh,
2
yeah.
scoops of ice cream, everyone else got 1. And it was like, this is non-stop with CNN all the time. But the thing that's important to keep in mind for people who are on the right is that this is what many regular people see. And they have no reason to think that it's wrong. They don't know.
Right.
And they're not going to see this Project Veritas video unless you share it. A lot of people will not see it. And those people, and this is so important, many people, not all people, but many people are not driven by statistics or by data or by even logical arguments necessarily. They're driven largely by emotion, and that emotion is driven largely by what they see when they watch the news and when they read the news online. And until conservatives learn that no amount of arguments, no amount of election victories, nothing is going to change people's perception of many of these issues, not all people, but a segment of society, nothing will change their minds until we have a bigger microphone, until we have a bigger voice, until we have a bigger influence in the culture and within institutions, including the news media. We'll never be able to reach these people because the message that they're getting all the time is, frankly, propaganda. Like, that's what it is. And when you are deliberately, as a news outlet like CNN, manipulating people in that way, then and you know that there are millions of people who pay attention to you on your website and watch you on cable news, and you deliberately do this, you think of the kind of people that you're talking about here, the kind of people who are willing to do that. I mean, it is not only shameful, it is not only bad for society, it is not only dishonest, but it is deeply, deeply immoral stuff. I mean, manipulating. I mean, this guy's talking about how we manipulated society and we won and we were rewarded for it. Yeah. We have to, on the right, learn this lesson and find ways to get around this and to build influential institutions of our own or take over institutions when we have the opportunity to change the messaging. Otherwise, we're never going to win because these people are dishonest that we are fighting against.
Yeah, and Jim, I think we would be naive to think that this is going to be limited to just CNN, right? Like, this is probably a coordinated effort. You're going to see this on news across the spectrum, whether it's your kind of local NBC stuff and MSNBC, CNN. Like, they're all gonna take this baton and run with it once it was kind of given like COVID's not getting the attention that it used to get anymore. We got to focus on something else. I'd be surprised if we didn't see a swing across the whole media in the direction of climate change alarmism. What do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it used to be that your local news would be a bit of a reprieve against the usual left-wing bias of the national networks and the cable networks and all of that, with the exception of Fox News. And now, Justin, there are competitors. Newsmax and OAN are out there, and their audiences are growing. There's networks like The First, and of course Blaze TV. People are not consuming news the way they used to historically, either over the air or in cable. They're increasingly just streaming the news that they want to watch. So what's interesting. Well, not interesting, but what's a fact about our culture is that the narrative of CNN gets into the mainstream of society. I mean, it's, you can't hide from the left-wing narrative on news. It's always with you. And people who watch CNN will not, as you said, will not be exposed to this Project Veritas video. They actually have a show on CNN called Reliable Sources, which is the intent is to examine the news and criticize news coverage. All they do is obsess over Fox News. They don't do any coverage about MSNBC and the lies they tell. They obviously are not going to cover this story, which is one of the biggest media stories in a long time. I am very proud that the Heartland Institute is awarding the Heartland Liberty Prize to James O'Keefe from Project Veritas, because without him, spoiler alert, it's on the website. It's all right.
Whoa.
But if he doesn't do this, nobody would. What I love about this is, a couple of takeaways on this is, one, I thought, Donald Trump was actually too easy on CNN.
Right.
They're not just fake news. They are, what's worse than fake news? They're liars. They are absolute liars. And I know he said that. And they're manipulative. They have no interest. They had no interest in covering his administration fairly. I mean, you can see it right now. Biden is going to withdraw all the troops from Afghanistan, and all of the so-called mainstream media, the corporate corrupt media, are all praising it like it's about time. He's finally ending the longest war. Trump has been advocating that since he ran for president in 2016, and he actually put in place the withdrawal process that Biden is actually carrying out. When Trump announced it, it was irresponsible and dangerous, and you're putting American lives at risk. You and I and the listeners to this podcast know these things because we consume different media. We don't just sit there mindlessly taking what the CNNs and MSNBCs and ABCs and CBSs of the world feed us. We actually have we hear that stuff, but then we also consume other media. Half this country only consumes the one side, and that's the thing that the left knows that, and CNN knows that, which is why they know they can get away with trying to manipulate the public instead of just informing the public. So Trump was way too easy on CNN, as it turns out. When you see a thing like this, and I love James O'Keefe because he employs the same tactics that were made famous and got Emmys and Peabody Awards for outfits like 60 Minutes and 2020
journalism.
Yeah, actual investigative journalism with hidden cameras. When James O'Keefe does it to expose the corruption of our corporate media, it's suddenly this horrible thing, and he gets sued. He's won all of his lawsuits, by the way, and he's called, this is disreputable, and this is debunked, and this is taken out of context. None of that stuff ever applies to the corrupt corporate media. And what I love about this is that this operation was so great. His staffer at Project Veritas, his reporter, and that's what he does. He's his journalism organization. His reporter found each other, and the CNN technical director on Tinder. He thought he was on dates. He thought he was on dates with a liberal girl, and he just let it all out. Why not? You're trying to impress her, so and that's what's great. It was so perfect. I'm on a date. I want to impress her. I'm really going to talk about how things work here. This will really impress her. I'm really in the know.
That actually kind of explains some of this. He's trying to talk himself up. Oh yeah, I single-handedly took down Trump. Me and my organization.
well, he said he joined CNN because he wanted to be part of it. That's what he said. I want to be part of it, taking out Trump. And so, and one last thing is that the media bias here and the corruption of the media is nothing new. Walter Cronkite, which our older listeners will remember, he was, the most trusted man in America. The Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War was actually a victory for the Americans and the South Vietnamese, but it was purposely portrayed by Cronkite, and everyone followed his lead, as a disaster for the American project in Vietnam, putting aside whether we should have been there or not. It was a fact that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong were crushed in the Tet Offensive. But he wanted us to get out of Vietnam. He wanted to portray it as a failure. So he did, and the rest of the media did too. Dan Rather, I was in the Washington press corps when this happened, the White House press corps when this happened. Dan Rather and the fake documents that said that George W. Bush was skipping out on his Air National Guard duty in the Vietnam War. It was an obviously fake document. It was completely fake news. Dan Rather, to this day, says that it was fake but accurate. And so that happened. That was 17 years ago when that happened. And then today you have all the corrupt and bullshit lies of the media today, with the Russia collusion hoax, with that story that everyone ran with that Trump called the people buried in Normandy losers, and I'm not going to spend some time over there. That was completely fake. And then the latest one that's actually just come out in the last couple of days, the so-called Russian bounty story, that Trump was told that Russia was putting out bounties on American servicemen in Afghanistan, and he was ignoring that warning. That's completely fake. The media is now backing away from that, but they kept at it when it was going to damage Trump, because, like the CNN technical director said, we want to take out Trump, and I want to be a part of it. And so, this has got a long history. People should not trust the media. They should do a lot of reading, and they should listen to podcasts like this weekly, actually, to be informed.
Yeah, I referenced hours-long rants by Jim on the topic of
I know, I'm sorry.
Terrible media, but so that was just a little clip of that. What could be a whole other podcast episode. But considering that, they kind of showed their hand, they revealed that the next big media push is going to be for climate change alarmism, climate change action, I think it would be good for us to kind of have a refresher of sorts, a kind of a primer on the topic of climate change. So you kind of know how to respond. Our audience knows how to respond when you get the inevitable onslaught of faux concern from your friends and family, et cetera, over climate change. So, of course, you could get more info on climate change than you could ever dream of using by tuning into our upcoming 14th International Conference on Climate Change, hosted by the Heartland Institute. Jim, you could probably tell us a little bit more about that, too.
Yeah, well, we're having, it's October, looking at my calendar, October 15 through 17 in Las Vegas, Nevada at Caesars Palace. We're having our 14th International Conference on Climate Change. We're going to have some of the leading scientists and policy experts on climate and environment and energy policy in the country. And we're also actually tying it together. Justin Haskins and Donnie Kendal will also be there because the climate question and especially the way the media is going to be pushing a climate crisis and a climate emergency and trying to convince the public that we have to take strict governmental action to save the planet and to save everyone on Earth. That's tied into the whole Great Reset agenda. And so, we're putting that all together. If you want to learn about what's really happening to the climate and learn about what the Great Reset is all about and what organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are actually putting plans in place right now to basically reorder society. And it's all tied into climate. So that's October 15 through 17 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Go to heartland.org and you can get more information.
Perfect. So before we get into some of the main points, because I want to cover a lot of like the main stuff that kind of circulates when the climate change topic kind of rears its ugly head. But before we get into those kind of main points, I want to ask you all your beliefs in regards to climate change. We say at the Heartland Institute's not a church. Various people in the organization are going to have different thoughts and stances and opinions on different matters. And who the hell knows what goes on at the center of the American experiment. So let's talk about climate change. I want to start with Justin. Where do you fall on the climate denialism spectrum?
Climate denialism spectrum. Okay. I see how it is.
Brought to you by Cheerios.
Yeah. So look, I think one of the biggest misunderstandings that most people have who are, curious about this topic or really interested in it at all in any way, whether you lean on one side or the other side, is that there are two camps. One camp is people who don't believe global warming exists. And the other camp is people who believe global warming exists and they want to do something to try to stop it. And that's the two camps. But in reality, there are two camps. But the two camps are broken down like this. One side believes that global warming, they don't even necessarily believe it, but they say it and they advocate for the idea that global warming is going to kill all of us and destroy the world and is an existential threat to humanity. And if we don't completely change and transform our society, we are going to be wiped out. And then everybody else is the other camp. Okay? That's pretty much how it works. So if you don't fall into the Bernie Sanders, AOC, Joe Biden camp of it's an existential crisis, and if we don't do anything about it, we're all going to die, then you're with us.
Right.
You might not be happy about that. Sometimes I'm not happy about that. But that's the reality of the situation. So where do I fall within that camp? Within that camp, I think that global warming is happening. Climate change is obviously happening. I think that humans are very likely contributing at least somewhat to it. That's my personal opinion. There's a lot of scientists who don't agree with that, but that's what I think. I don't think it's an existential crisis. I think humanity is going to be fine regardless of what happens. I believe that the solutions to the problem of changing climate, whether that means climate getting colder or climate getting warmer over time, is to innovate our way out of it. I think if you're concerned about CO2 emissions and you think CO2 emissions are the primary driver of global warming, then you should be supporting nuclear energy, not any other kind of so-called green energy sources, which are terrible for the environment and costly and really just an excuse for the left to completely rework society. And Michael Moore would pretty much agree with everything that I just said right there, except for maybe the nuclear part. He just thinks we should have fewer humans. But I think that I think that most people, the vast majority of people, when you actually break it down into that way, agree with us. It's just that because the media has presented this as a bunch of people who trust science and then a bunch of people who don't trust science,
Right.
people tend to fall into that category of, well, I want to be on the side of scientists, and
Right.
but that's not really, that's just a false argument. This is about really people who have an extremist view. And I know that sounds kind of crazy to say, but it's true. If you believe that humanity is not going to survive because of global warming, that's an extremist view. It's crazy. And then everybody else.
Right. Isaac, would you disagree? Would you distance yourself from anything Justin said there, or are you kind of in agreement?
As much as it pains me to say it, I'm basically in agreement with Justin.
Man, a few words. Jim, how about you? You've been kind of in this game a little bit longer than us.
I've been in every game longer than you.
Yeah, I think
old man.
a little longer is also not exactly accurate. If this is fake news, Donnie, I think we gotta be.
Yeah, we gotta be
Well, I
accurate.
don't
We're
know.
not gonna.
I think you've been in the no carbs club longer than we have.
Yeah, 4 days.
Good point.
I can't take it anymore. No, I mean, Justin has it right. I mean, the Heartland Institute, we work with scientists from around the world, literally every continent but Antarctica, because nobody lives there full time. But scientists do. And I would actually,
we got to get one of those Antarctica scientists. We got to get on that.
Yeah, we got some penguins on our side too.
we do. No, but what's interesting is that one of the things I really find fascinating about the climate debate that the Heartland Institute and the scientists that we work with have is that there's an actual debate going on, because we have scientists who think the sun is the main driver of the temperature of the Earth, and it has to do with the solar cycles, and it's nothing to worry about. Others are focused on ocean currents, because that actually has a lot of effect on the climate, and it's not as well understood as you might think. Others are atmospheric scientists, and they're convinced that that is the most important factor in what happens to the climate. What you learn when you come to a Heartland Climate Conference is that there are a lot of scientists who are very smart, that have different ideas and different theories about what drives the climate. But one thing they actually unite on is that it's natural. Mother Nature is much, much stronger than human activity. And like Justin said, do humans have zero effect on the climate? Of course not. That's absurd. And nobody that is serious on our side of this debate would say so. And none of them actually do. It's a matter of degree. And the other side, the climate alarmist side, is so manic that they actually believe that, if we all go to electric vehicles, we can save the Earth. That's absurd. That's childish thinking. Yeah. The scientists we work with, like I said, disagree, and you learn a lot about what happened, about what actually happens in our climate, what effects that more CO2 in the atmosphere has. I learned from Dr. Fred Singer, may he rest in peace. He passed away just about a year ago. And he taught me through a lecture that I saw with him that the effect of carbon dioxide as a warming agent in the atmosphere decreases the more you put it into the atmosphere.
Sure.
In other words, it's not a straight line; it's parabolic. So it's we could go from we're about 412, I think, parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. We could go to 500, and the effect of the temperature, at least it's the ability to warm the Earth, would be minuscule compared to what happened when we went from 200 to 400. And you say these things, and you try to convince climate alarmists, but just look at the data. The data says that this is not a problem. Justin, you hit it on the head before. This is not you can't reason with people who are either religiously dedicated to climate alarmism or have been conditioned through our media to be afraid. And that's an emotional response. It's very hard to reason with somebody when their emotions rule everything they supposedly think about something, because they're not actually thinking, they're feeling. But you can still come to our climate conference, and you can actually learn a lot. You can watch it online or come to Vegas with us. It's really an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, generally, I don't get in terms of conversations that I have with peers or friends or family, I don't necessarily get bogged down in some of the things that you're talking about, like the science stuff. And, that sounds kind of like I'm dismissing it. I'm really not. It's just how do you have a conversation with a peer about the, sensitivity levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. And, and there is room for that. Jim, you've got a whole stack of those books behind you over there that's just filled with that type of stuff. And surely, the ICC 14 is going to be filled with people talking about it. But, to me, like, the conversation starts with the idea of the consensus. Everyone agrees the consensus is in. 97% of scientists believe in climate change. And that stat is based on a couple of faulty premises. My favorite of which I think is actually the origin of that 97 stat, is like this poll that they put out that was composed of 2 questions. One is there warming? And 2 is, does human activity play a role in it? That's the 2 questions. Justin just said that he would totally say yes to both of those things. So Justin would be part of that 97%, right? And I would wager that 97% of the people that are going to be giving presentations at ICCC 14 also would agree with those 2 points. Absolutely. So that whole consensus thing does not hold any water. So that's a kind of a good place to start. And then the existential threat is probably the next biggest thing. Are we all going to die from this? Is this going to cause human extinction? Because surely that's what a lot of the talking heads on CNN are going to be talking about once COVID kind of takes a side role in all of this and climate change kind of gets into the forefront. And Justin, you already kind of covered the whole thing. It's not going to cause extinction. We covered that pretty well when we had Michael Schellenberger on, when he was talking about his book, Apocalypse Never. This is not an existential threat. So we can kind of put that one to bed. I think the next one that would kind of come up, the next topic is the concept of extreme weather. Is climate change causing bigger hurricanes and more tornadoes and more droughts and more floods simultaneously, and forest fires and all of this stuff? And we have a website, climaterealism.com, that covers basically all of those. Just you could find any article on there that kind of dismisses any one of those items. So we can kind of move on from that one if you're interested. Or Isaac, do you want to jump in on one of those topics that I'm kind of breezing through here?
No, but I would recommend if our listeners want to know more about that, they could check out Lukewarming by Pat Michaels. That's a really good book. And False Alarm by Bjorn Lomborg is actually pretty good too. So if you want to learn more about this for yourself, obviously Apocalypse Never is a really good thing to check out.
Yeah, no doubt about that. We did an entire hour with Michael Schellenberger. It was one of our most viewed episodes on YouTube for this podcast. So maybe I'll link that one in the show.
Remember when you welched on your bet as a result of that, Donnie? You said if there was 10,000 views, you'd shave your head or cut your hair. Incorrect.
It was 10,000 views before the next episode. We did not get that.
No, you just totally wimped out. You're a total wimp.
We could pull up the audio if we really wanted to. So then once we put all of those things to bed, the consensus...
Justin, are you understanding anything Donnie's saying? I don't understand wimp.
No, Donnie is
the existential threat, the extreme weather. I get to control the mute boards here, fellas, so you guys could talk all day long. So once all of those things get put to rest, then we can actually get into my favorite kind of part of the conversation when climate change inevitably comes up, which is kind of like the practical solutions idea, right? So it's like, there's even this idea that gets floated every once in a while on Twitter that's like, okay, well, even if it's not an existential threat, like, what's the worst that happens? We have clean energy. Great. Let's go for it. Right. So that's like the proposed solution to all of this. We could just run our entire economy on wind and solar. Right. And this kind of is what gets into like Isaac's wheelhouse, too, with energy policy. And in my notes here, my first point against this supposed green energy is that it's expensive. And Isaac, you have done a lot of work on that one. Just the idea that the only reason that wind and solar are even in the conversation is because of massive government subsidies. So if you have anything to add to that point, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, that's true.
You're just the worst. Whatever.
I can talk about it. She's up now, right? Maple was asleep here, so I was trying to accommodate the pup. She's only 10 weeks old. She's a baby. So
obviously distracted, Isaac.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Well, the biggest thing about wind and solar is people who pretend that they're the lowest cost forms of energy. We hear that reasoning all the time. They never talk about the subsidies, as they pretend that, subsidies actually lower the cost of something rather than just transfer where it gets paid, which is inaccurate. They never talk about the transmission lines that need to get built for the wind turbines. And they never talk about the natural gas plant that you need to have ready to go in order to back up the grid. Like, The whole problem with Texas and their blackouts was they weren't paying for the natural gas plants to back it up. They were trying to have one system that was an integration of wind and solar, when really you need a complete duplication of capacity if you want to be able to, have electricity, which I think 97% of people would agree with, right? So
Might be 100%.
No, the other 3% are like the hippies and communes and stuff.
well, yeah, and the Amish. Let's not forget about our friends in Pennsylvania and Amherst, Wisconsin. Pour one out for them. My grandpa bought a horse from the Amish. His name was Cub. He was blind in one eye, and I liked him a lot.
And when you say pour one out for the Amish, you mean buttermilk, right?
Right, exactly. Amish paradise.
Isaac, to kind of promote one of the things that you did recently, you had a piece on the AmericanExperiment.org. That's an interview with Robert Bryce, who is still with the Manhattan Institute, correct?
No, I think he's with FreeOp is the acronym. I don't remember what FreeOp stands for.
Well, regardless, he is very well versed in all of these kind of energy topics as well. Whenever I reference the concept of the vacant land myth, I always bring up Robert Bryce. He's done a lot of work on that. And the examples of that, and this kind of ties into what Isaac's talking about, the amount of land needed to have our economy even like partially run on wind and solar is just a ridiculous amount of land. And there's stories that we've covered numerous times, whether it's San Bernardino, California, upstate New York, and Vermont, I think, where they have these stories of people that are, facing these communities that are facing these proposed like massive wind and solar sites. And they usually respond with, not in my backyard. And even San Bernardino, which is like the largest county in the bluest state, and it's mostly a desert. And they're like, no, we don't want that in our backyard. So it's just like, like these things, they're not as easy to kind of get off the ground, even if you are fine with paying way higher rates. And then one of my favorite concepts when it comes to this green energy thing is that it's environmentally toxic. And the best example of this, if you really want to get a kind of a deep dive into this, is Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans, which, again, we covered pretty extensively on this podcast. The amount of mining required to get the amount of rare earth material needed to make in mass wind and solar is not good for the environment, to say the least. So
a lot of people in foreign countries, like we don't even let a mine get permitted here. So, Minnesota has some of the largest deposits of copper and nickel in the world that aren't being developed. And the Biden administration is trying to pull permits from PolyMet. So,
that's a good point, because we know that, and Justin, you could probably elaborate on this. The biggest producers of these rare earth materials is China.
Well, they're the ones that process the vast majority of it. They control the vast majority of rare earth minerals. The fact of the matter is this: if we were to actually rely on wind and solar, even if you could theoretically do that in a reliable way, that would make China the most powerful country in the world when it comes to energy. And because they're already so powerful, that would make them the most powerful country in the world, period. It would literally be handing out. I mean, probably everyone who's listening to this can remember back during the George W. Bush days, the big rallying cry was, we got to get away from Mideast oil, and we got to, drill domestically. And there was this huge wave of debate over whether we should be drilling in Anwar and all this other stuff, right? That was like such a big issue. And then because of the fracking revolution, we actually were able to become much more independent in terms of where we're getting our energy because of natural gas, and we're able to get it from fracking and everything else. And now what the left wants to do is give away our energy independence again, except this time, instead of giving it to the Middle East, they want to give it to literally our greatest geopolitical rival that we've ever had in China, with a growing population, and they're stealing technology from us all the time, and we've been sending jobs and massive amounts of wealth overseas to China for all of these years. They are literally human rights abusers that have hundreds of thousands of even millions of people in concentration camps in their
building
country. Building solar panels, right?
Bloomberg even said it.
Exactly.
Bloomberg says it. Bloomberg said they process the the panel materials there because they have access to cheap coal.
Right.
So it's literally solar panels are made by ethnic minority Muslim Uyghurs who are in concentration camps or re-education camps.
Right.
And they are using materials and tools that are electricity intensive. And that electricity is powered by coal.
Yeah,
it's literally the dumbest thing we could do.
It's pure insanity. And it's also to commit suicide like this as a country, economic suicide, makes absolutely no sense just in general. But to commit economic suicide in order to empower our greatest geopolitical rival is even dumber than that somehow. So the idea that the left is doing all of this to improve the environment is completely ludicrous because of what Isaac just alluded to, and not just the fact that you've got China, which is building massive coal plants throughout their country. They rely heavily on coal and cheaper forms of energy than what we're relying on here in the United States. But in addition to that, where do all these rare earth minerals come from? A lot of them come from other countries with low labor standards, with human rights abusers, with warlords that are, ruling over various parts of Africa and stuff. I mean, and you got to strip mine the earth in order to get this stuff out of it.
Right.
And then if we're going to run the whole world on it, then you got to strip mine a heck of a lot more than what we have right now. This is just what we're doing right now, and we're only a tiny little fraction of our society runs on this stuff. When if we were to actually get up to 100% or anywhere near that, even if it was 50% or 60% or 70%, the amount of mining that we would have to do, the amount of people who would be hurt by this, the amount of power that it would give to China, the amount of jobs that would be lost in the United States because of higher energy costs and because we'd be killing the fracking industry and natural gas and completely kill coal and every other form of conventional energy source, all of these things combined, how can anybody argue that this is good for the planet, that this is good for humanity, that this is the only way that you can make that argument is if you truly believe that we're all going to die from it. That's the only way. And if you really believe we're all going to die from it, then that should be your only priority. It should be the only thing we're talking about. And of course, we're not, because they don't really believe it. It's just a power play.
No. Yeah, that's exactly right. The ruling class doesn't actually believe we're all going to die. They want us to believe we're all going to die. And the purpose of all of this is not actually to go to a, you said, why would America want to crush its economy? Why would we want to be basically economically and politically subservient to the rest of the world? Because that's the plan. That's the idea. That's what they want. This is what the Great Reset is all about. We've talked about this, the Great Reset, on this podcast several times. The entire purpose of it, the big problem with implementing the Great Reset across the globe is the United States and its economic power and its freedom. That is big time in the way for these command and control bureaucrats in the United Nations and other places that don't like the way you live your life. It is inconvenient to them. Your freedom, your liberty, and America's energy independence is the huge speed bump in the way of what they want to accomplish. So the purpose is right now. The purpose is to destroy America's energy independence, to destroy our economy, so that we become subservient.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the last part of this conversation, and I do want to spend the last 5 minutes talking about Joe Biden's court packing idea, is just like, if people don't, okay, maybe they'll agree with you if you present enough stuff like this, that it's terrible for the environment to really do all the wind and solar and all of that stuff. It's like, we got to do something. You didn't convince me that this isn't a threat that we shouldn't take some precautions to avoid. So, like, what do you want to do instead, right? So that conversation comes up. Justin already kind of referenced this, so I'll throw it to Isaac because he's also a man of a few words. But, you are also kind of a proponent of nuclear power, correct?
Yeah, it's the only source of energy that can potentially be cheaper than fossil fuels someday. So, I think Dwight Eisenhower had it right when he said civilian nuclear is the way to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, and obviously it's there's no CO2 emissions. There's a whole bunch of plus sides to it. Michael Schellenberger, he's also a big advocate of this on his website, environmentalprogress.com, I believe.
I think it's .org.
Heartland.org. So he covers a lot of the kind of the myths about nuclear power as well, whether, it's going to radioactive, you're all going to die, Chernobyl, all that type of good stuff. So I would point you in that direction if you also want to pursue that concept of nuclear power. But I do want to spend, like I said, the last 5 minutes talking about the court packing thing. But just one last little kind of plug for all of this. We cover these topics a lot. We've got one of the best episodes, in my opinion, that we did was like the top 5 reasons why nuclear or wind and solar are terrible, where we go into all of the stuff that we just talked about in great detail with a lot of sources and all that stuff. I'll track down that episode and link it in the show notes. But yeah, so obviously if this takes off and it's true that CNN is really going to be pushing this 24/7 in the coming months, we here at the In the Tank podcast, AmericanExperiment.org, Heartland.org, we're going to be covering this stuff pretty closely. So, like I said, Joe Biden recently, there's an article that I see here, NBC, Democrats to introduce bill to expand the Supreme Court from 9 to 13 justices. The article starts off saying congressional Democrats will introduce legislation today to expand the Supreme Court from 9 to 13 justices, joining progressive activists pushing to transform the court. The move intensifies a high-stakes ideological fight over the future of the court after President Donald Trump and Republicans appointed 3 conservative justices in 4 years, including one who was confirmed just days before the 2020 election. So, I mean, Jim, don't you just love how that's framed? The Republicans started all of this.
Right.
The Democratic bill is led by Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts and Representative Jerry Nadler of New York, just two terrible people. The chair of the House Judiciary Committee. It is co-sponsored by Representatives Hank Johnson of Georgia, blah, 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 blah. Jim, do you think this has legs?
Sure. I mean, I remember the kind of sad podcast that we had right after the election, and I was like, yeah, well, I sure do look forward to having all my liberty and the future of America depend on the mood of Joe Manchin or Kirsten Sinema or Susan Collins, and that's basically where we are now. I mean, it was just today, this morning, about an hour before we started recording this podcast, when Jerry Nadler, intellectual giant, Jerry Nadler,
it's the only way to describe him as a giant.
A little giant. How about that? He introduced the legislation to expand the Supreme Court from 9 to 13 justices. This after, by the way, 4 years of the media and the Democrats saying that Trump was breaking all the norms. We've had 9 justices on the Supreme Court since the 19th century, but Trump was the one breaking all the norms. I actually have a little bit more faith than not that this will not make it through the Senate. The House will pass this, tomorrow if they vote on it. But I don't think it is going to get through the Senate. But then we have to save the filibuster, because that's there will be 50 votes to get it through the Senate. But so keep your eye on Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and Susan Collins, and because our liberty depends on what they decide.
So this comes like a week after the Biden administration created a commission to study the effects of court packing, or the idea of packing the court.
How can you study something that hasn't happened?
The potential.
How do you do that? How do you apply the scientific method to something that is totally theoretical?
Well, remember during the election, Biden refused to give a straight answer on the question of will he consider packing the court. Apparently, historically, Biden has dismissed the idea of packing the court, even referring to the idea as boneheaded in 1983. Granted, Biden probably doesn't remember much of anything anymore, so his personal opinion on the matter is probably anybody's guess.
Also, 3 of the people on the show right now weren't alive when he made that comment, so there's that.
It's a very good point. So, Justin, how do you think this plays out?
So this is going to sound, it might sound a little nuts. How do I think it's going to play out? I don't think it's going to get through.
Okay.
However, with that said, if it does get through, I think that this is the end of the United States of America. And I don't mean to be like overly dramatic about it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode.
I don't mean to be overly dramatic about it, but seriously,
Justin.
Well, think about it, Isaac. If we add 4 Supreme Court justices, okay, and they're all Biden appointees, obviously. They're just going to put a bunch of liberals on the court.
Liberals, leftists, radicals will be on.
Sure, it doesn't even matter though. If they could be John Roberts, and it would be bad enough. All right. So if they do that, then the next time there's a big important case that goes in front of the Supreme Court, who on our side is going to take that seriously? Like, does anyone really think that Texas is going to be like, okay, well, I guess the Supreme Court ruled the Second Amendment doesn't matter anymore? Like, I don't think so. I think Texas is going to say, we don't care what you guys say.
So the integrity of the institution would be just destroyed.
The integrity of the institution is already hanging by a thread.
Right.
And this would absolutely rip it to pieces. And if you don't have a Supreme Court that people can put any trust in at all, because they already don't really trust any institution that much, but if they can't put any trust in it at all, then seriously, you can't have a country. You literally can't have a country, because if Texas is going to say, we don't care what the Supreme Court says, good luck trying to force us to do something that you want us to, that the fake court that you put together told us we have to do, then seriously, the country will just, it will split apart. Like, it literally will split apart. And I think the left knows this, and they're fine with it. Because I think from their perspective, they feel like if we come to that moment in time where Texas has to say we're going to secede from the union, essentially, or, whatever, they feel like they'll have the moral high ground at that moment in time, and that they'll score some political points off of it and whatever. And worst case scenario, Texas is gone and they win more elections and they consolidate their power in the states that they control. Like, I don't think that they are worried about the United States falling apart at all. And that's the only reason that you would actually support this, because even if you were a hardcore left-wing socialist who believes that we should do this, you have to know that this will only end horribly for the unity of the country if you actually go through with it.
All right, well, we will definitely cover, this as it progresses, or hopefully doesn't progress on this podcast, but we are pretty much out of time here. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. If you like our show, please subscribe. Write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. You can find our podcast on all of your favorite websites to download this type of material. We're also on YouTube if you want to put a face to the voice. You could also follow us on Twitter. Don't follow us on Twitter. But if you want to send us your comments, suggestions, questions, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me at Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always go to heartland.org.
At The Fracking Guy. Isaac, where can the fine people find you?
At The Fracking Guy.
And Justin Haskins. Last but not least, obviously, where can the fine people find you?
Well, they can find me on Socialist Twitter and other places. But I want to talk to you about Cheerios. Cheerios. As part of a heart-healthy diet, the soluble fiber in Cheerios can help lower cholesterol. 3 grams of soluble fiber daily from whole grain.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.
We needed that ad revenue.
That's true.